good evening. I know you can. I don't know. I don't think you can hear the sea outside, but I think we can all feel it. And it's been a really long day, and I'm sure everybody's sort of had, but there's been lots of food for thought. So, in a way, the session that Andy and I are going to do, well, the questions that I'm going to ask Andy are really about the kind of about well like the KLF, where there is so much choice and so much for you to see, and how do you sort of how do you take back, and what do you do with it? In some ways, it's the abundance of conversation, and how do you simplify it in sort of a very simplistic way, is how I'm putting it in. But um, for those who haven't read the book, the abundance of less is, we always talk about transformational books, and we talk about books that transform. And in some ways, Andy talks about transformation, which is, it's a word, but we don't really see, we don't really investigate of how much of change actually happens within. Um, and it's a book that leaves you asking questions, in the plethora of books that you overcome, that you come across today. This book is possibly essential reading for you to understand how you can negotiate life. I think it deals with one of the most fundamental questions of our times: how much is enough? How do you live sustainably? How do you live simply? That doesn't necessarily mean easily. And he has these 10 characters who sort of live off the grid, if I could put it in many ways. They don't run after money. Money for them um, isn't important, really. They grow their own food, they cook their own food. And I mean, while this sounds sort of impossible, or very difficult, I think the book forces you to confront questions of yourself, as to, you might not be able to grow your own food, but can you change incredibly? So, can I? So it's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you.
And I would like to start off really with Andy doing something slightly different. He wants to start the session on a different note.
Yes. Hi, everybody. How are you feeling? How are you feeling? Are you comfortable? Going to make yourself more comfortable? Feel your feet on the ground. Connect with your body. You've had a lot happening today. It's a big honor to be here. Maybe look to the person to your right and the person to your left and say hello to them. This may seem like a small thing, but maybe the person next to you could help you live the life that you'd like to live, a more sustainable, ecological life. We can't do it by ourselves. And just take a moment. This is a good way to get outside of our ego, to thank all of the people who made this possible. Someone built the stage. Someone is cleaning up our garbage right now. Someone is arranged this, all of the video equipment, the videographers, the photographers, so many people. Energy has already come to support you, so you can just feel that support. I just think that's a nice way to begin.
So, yeah. So, can I start off with asking you this question? Um, the abundance of less. You're not really saying just the simplicity of less, but you're not saying less is more, which is very much jargon, but you're saying the abundance of less. So, could you really talk about that?
Well, let's just start about asking a question. Maybe you can just ask yourself, do you feel that you have enough time? Do you feel rushed, or do you feel like you really do have enough time for what you need? And if you do feel that things are a bit more rushed than you'd like, where could you find slowness in your life? Where could you find just a little bit of space? So these people that I met in rural Japan, there's 10 of them, men and women. Many of them lived in India for a long time. So I hope you'll find that interesting. They found that there was a way to live that was not accelerated. And they grew up, many of them were born right after the war. And in Japan at that time, you might even still see ox carts, people dressed in kimono. But very quickly, everything industrialized. And one woman said, I felt like I could hardly breathe. Everything was speeding up. But when I went back to India, I felt like there was a place, when I went to India, she said, there was a place where I could really see rural life as it was when I was a girl. And so what is it that would happen if you had enough time? If you made enough time in your life to contemplate what you want to do with your days, to contemplate what is your craft? If you had enough time for community activism, and you were drinking out of glass bottles instead of plastic bottles. You had enough time to cook your own meals. So it's that kind of abundance where things are not so hyper accelerated that you feel like you're just kind of rushing to catch up all the time. I mean, that is the modern condition, and I experience it too. So how are we going to think our way out of that? And I guess the thing I'd like to say about that is what if that having more time for yourself, having more time for your community, having more time for your spirituality or your art or your writing, if that were part of the answer of the world ecological crisis.
So in some ways, you're saying that it boils down to individual choices.
That's a very provocative question. I love it. I mean, obviously, our society does rush us. And so I think there's a real role for social and community activism. I think at least I'll speak for the United States, the economy is partially based on, you know, fear, panic, trauma,
Yeah,
rush.
yeah.
And we can't just change that entirely. But I would say through developing our own metal and our own mettle, our own fiber for what we want to do with our days, that can also help move society in the direction that we want to. But even if we're political activists, one of the women in the book,
Yeah.
she's an anti-nuclear activist. If she was working 70 hours a week, she would have no time for protesting nuclear power. As you know, it's very dangerous, particularly in Japan. They had the Fukushima accident. That was in 2011. These people have been anti-nuclear activists for 20 years before that. If you don't have time to be involved politically because you're so rushed, how are we going to make social change?
So I want to come and talk about the political activism and anti-nuclear activism that happens with these 10 characters. But I'll save that for later. I wanted to ask you a question. Essentially, you have these 10 characters. Each of them do different things. You profile their lives. You spend enough time. You sort of do an update. And I wanted to ask you, I think everybody would be interested into how you landed in Japan. I mean, essentially, why Japan, and how you got interested in this idea of a slow life.
Well, sometimes happenstance and serendipity. Serendipity
Yes.
is a wonderful word. It
Yeah.
comes from the original word for Sri Lanka,
Yes.
a happy accident.
Yes.
But
I always love that story.
my partner and I, both when we were children, we wanted to have our own piece of property, live in the country, build our own house, grow our own food. But we didn't have any money to purchase land, which is how you would get land in the United States, at least. And so we didn't want to work for corporations. We were already far left in our teens and early 20s. And we heard that we could live in Japan, teach English. It is a colonial language, so one has to be careful. But we thought we could help out, and it was pretty good wages at the time. So we worked a lot and we saved money. But we had a stereotyped view of Japan, that it was all blue-suited salarymen no time, working all the time, very hierarchical society, very status oriented society,
Yeah.
women having very low status. And that's all true, but we found that there was a very vibrant subculture, and
Yeah.
particularly rural subculture there. And that's what made us stay there and go back again and learn Japanese and speak to the people and find out how could they, in a society that was more money oriented and more status oriented than the United States, have how internally were they able to make these decisions to reject all of the enticements towards luxury or status? And that was very important to me, also because of my own personal history.
So, can I ask you to sort of introduce these 10 people, tell a little bit about their stories before we go on to this thing? Because I think it would be interesting for everybody to sort of kind of see the range there is. You start with Uzumi,
Yes,
yeah?
sure.
He's a potter who is incredibly good at what he does and incredibly coveted, but he does only a certain amount because he doesn't want to get, I mean, to sort of paraphrase it and put it into this thing, but he doesn't want to get too rich. He doesn't want the money to sort of take away his creative need in some ways, right? He doesn't want to get too comfortable. And then can we go on to be on this thing, just a little bit about each character so
About
that we
each
know,
one.
yeah.
Okay, so Mr. San Oizumi is a potter, and he sort of can do anything. He's can dress a wild boar that's been
Yeah.
killed. He can make an igloo. He dug a tea house under a mountainside. He's a practitioner of the Japanese way of tea. He's an anarchist. He's a very well-known potter, but
Yeah.
not status-oriented at all. I can tell you a little story about him in a second, but if
Yes.
you'd like a little tidbit, the second person in the book is Mr. Nakamura. He's a woodblock carver. He lived in Nepal for 10 years, about 8 days walk from the nearest road, and he studied Nepali wood carving with a Tibetan teacher. And he lives probably the simplest of everyone. I think there's like 3 light bulbs. He just got a phone a few years ago, and he lives on almost no money at all. Atsuko, who I mentioned, is a mother and anti-nuclear activist. She's the person who introduced me to everyone else. She is
I love how their lives are connected in some ways. You sort of, they're all sort of in this whole group. It's really like a circle of friends in many ways.
Yes, yeah. So they all met each other living in Nepal doing cultural preservation work around Newari Buddhism and some sacred texts and sacred images. Mr. Murata is a bamboo flute player. He plays a giant bamboo flute. He's also a rice farmer, not just a gardener. Many of these people grow their own food, but he grows enough to. He doesn't really sell it. He kind of barters it, gets a little bit of money, but he plays 7 flute songs from the ancient tradition, 700, 800, 900-year-old songs. I call him the exuberant Buddhist.
Yes.
There's a fabric artist. She lived in Shantiniketan. This is Miss Amemiya in chapter 5. I'm sure you wanted me to do every person here. Maybe I'll just give you Amemiya. Amemiya is she's a tough customer, and she was not an easy interview. And she's like, your questions are stupid. She was very tough with me. But she also lives a really rich life. She lived in Shantiniketan for a decade. She wrote a book about Sikkim. She does batik. She does Tagore poems in fabric. And can I tell you the little story about her?
Yes, please do, because I think
it begins this chapter on Miss Amemiya. She said, if you don't have a lot of unsatisfied people, the economy just stops dead. And it's a big problem. I said, unsatisfied people are necessary? I said, what did you mean? She said, well, think about a new computer comes out, and it's really good, and it's got all these features, and so you want it, right? Well, you buy it. Well, then the new one comes out, and it's even better. So then you want that too. And so this dissatisfaction, and people think, well, some point I'll be satisfied. But they don't realize, I'm quoting her, they don't realize it's never ending. just keeps going and going, and you have to speed up because they're not going to give you that computer for free. So you have to work more and more and more. And so she's like, us satisfied people just ruin capitalism. So she's very funny that way. But I think that's a big key for us. Like, how can we be satisfied with what we have, with this
Yeah.
moment, with each other right now?
So, at some point of time in the book, you talk about technology and you say how much of that is also changes who you are. And I'm just trying to find the quote that you talked about where you say that, in the afterword, where you say that, having everything at a push of a button changes who you are. I'm paraphrasing what you said.
Yes.
But can you really talk about that? The aspect of how much comfort is sort of takes away from how does it change you, how does it transform you, and why is it important to sort of not maybe shun technology, but certainly have, keep technology as a tool rather than becoming absorbed by it.
Well, that's very difficult, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Everyone's got their phone on them, maybe checking it at this moment. Do I have a message? You know?
Yeah.
Oh no, what if something's, happening and I didn't find out about it? Well, how does that make your body feel right now to worry that maybe you're getting a message that you're missing? So let's talk about the word tool. People, there's a thing that people say that's a little rubs me the wrong way. It's just a tool. Well, if you've ever used a hammer or a chainsaw, you realize that a tool, if you're a hammer, everything seems like a nail, right? And my partner and I, we built our own house. We used a hammer. It's a good tool, but it creates a certain consciousness in you, right? And, fencing creates a certain consciousness in you. And a saw, and a hand saw versus a circular saw, an electric saw, the sound of it, all of this changes who you are. So myself, I don't have a so-called smartphone as much as possible. Sometimes I'll carry it around when I'm traveling because it's very difficult.
You lost yours today, right?
I did lose it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that same panic. Oh no, I'm not going to be able to be in touch. So we become dependent, don't we? And we become, in some sense, I'm going to use a strong word, infantilized by these machines that are supposed to help us. And Amimiya, again, she said, convenience just speeds you up. Convenience just speeds you up. So if you think about it, it's like, it's more convenient, I can get more things done, more things can happen, right? And you're going faster and faster and faster and faster. And you lose contact with your soul, and you lose contact with what's important for you. So how do we keep it on a leash? I think it's not easy, and that's why I said, look at the person next to you. Maybe you'll have a conversation with him or her. Maybe tonight when you go home, you'll take out your notebook, there's a literature festival, and your pen, and you do some writing about...
Well,
yes,
technology.
Yeah, you'll do some writing about how does this tool serve me, and how can I make it a better part of my rich life as opposed to some thing that becomes unconscious, because it is actually a distraction economy, right? Like there's an actual price per share which is based on how distracted you get, right? There's someone actually making money on your loss of connection. And then just to get a little bit serious here, you might get I hope not, but at some point we're all going to die. You might get a cancer diagnosis and you realize, I've spent my whole life chatting on, some social media platform. Is this really what I wanted to do? So kind of keep asking, thinking about your own mortality and your own connection with your friends and your own connection with the natural world as a way to realize, am I in a healthy relationship with this piece of technology? And I would say, keep asking yourself that question. You might get a good answer.
There, technology.
You might
But
get
okay, so let me read what you'd said, which I found very profound. It said, too much of my humanity is lost if everything is push button.
Yes. Well, just imagine yourself on a couch with a remote control pushing a button, right? Look at your hands. Your hands can do so many things. But when we just bring it back to just like pushing that button, right? and everything is done for us, you're sort of losing your capacity to think, as Oizumi said, you're losing the capacity to think for yourself, and life is too short to lose that. It's too precious.
Okay, so I think at some point of time we have to ignore that. But
is there some way to get the music to be turned down?
Trying.
Could someone work on
trying.
that? It would be nice.
Trying. Can we get the music switched off? Oh, okay. Okay, now it's become softer. Can I ask you, you said two things, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what you said in terms of recording. You said that, maybe today you'll go back home and you will write in your diary and talk about what you've seen. And you have Gufu, who is an important character, one of the characters that you have in the book. And he has traveled across India and Nepal at a particular time, and he has done these incredible drawings and sort of everyday ordinary things that he saw, whether it was a temple or it is, it's somebody making jalebis, or it is, this samovar. It's beautifully detailed. It's just incredible. It's really art in many ways, in every way. And it sort of preserves and sees what he sees every day, from a bus ticket to various things. And you talk really about the importance of recording. And you say that it's important to create these details, to create this fabric of time, of memory, which refuses to change when the tsunami of time has gone through, and your memory, essentially you remember things differently as you grow older. Its memory is not as, it's subjective, right? Can you talk really about the importance of keeping that piece of writing? And then you also can we talk about the writing and the workshops you do? So yeah, lots of questions, but
yeah. Well, we just finished a year, 2024. Did you take some time to write about the things that were important that happened to you in 2024? Did you write it down so that you could? I'm not really a illustrator, but sometimes I'll do a little drawings. Sometimes from my dream world, I'll do some drawings. But just it's about savoring your own life and not letting it rush by, right? Because it is actually a blessing. How unlikely it is that you were even born. How incredible that you have the health and food and time and clothes. So take some time to really write down what's happened to you. I do teach writing workshops, which are partly about reliving your own life. Anais Nin says we write to taste life twice. Once in the moment and twice in reflection. But also you can transform it with imagination too. So it's not just recording, which is also interesting to me. But what was fantastic about Gufu, and I have some illustrations in the book, and I have a lot of other illustrations if you'd like to see, come ask me afterwards. But
I'm trying to see if I can find some in the book.
But he didn't have a camera. And I'll say it in Japanese. By the way, this was all done in Japanese. So for me, it was quite important to learn Japanese and not just kind of... Can you see that?
Can you see a little bit of what... Sorry, don't worry. I have, as I said, Bulandavas. So can you see that? I mean, it's essentially a shopkeeper, but it's beautifully detailed and it's incredible. So just to give you a flavor of what it is.
He says, kamera ga attara zenbu kamera ni narimasu, which means if you have a camera, everything becomes the camera. Everything becomes the camera. So if you were to take some time to, I don't know, just sketch the piers out on the water there behind you, right? We saw them. They're beautiful, right? They're kind of have a different interesting pattern. If you just sat down, instead of just snapping a picture of it, but really drawing it out, how much deeper that would enter into your life. So yeah, it's important to capture the things that matter to you. And again, that's about time and how do you make that time in your life. And that's about designing your life so that you're not too panic driven about running out of money because you've, gotten too far into debt, or, too interested in becoming the CEO of everything.
So, can we talk about money? Because essentially, in the book, most people who are, I mean, all the people that you deal with, don't, do not have a transactional or do have a very different relationship with money, right? Money isn't, time isn't money. They wouldn't trade their rather slow life for more money, all of them. Money is a means to an end. It's sort of a tool, but there are people who sort of want to try and live without money. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because in a world which is so commercial and consumerist, what is trying to live simply without money? I mean, it's sort of transformational, right? It's.
Well, one of the things that's quite interesting, particularly when we first got to rural Japan in the 90s, many of the old people, the people in their 70s and 80s and 90s, grew up with almost no interaction with the cash economy. I grew up in the United States. My grandparents, my great grandparents got the things they needed by exchanging bills, money, for objects, for food. What would it be to try to fulfill your needs? That's the purpose of an economy, right? To get the things that you need, maybe a few things that you enjoy. But if I were to say, you've just won $100 million, right?
Yeah.
Or you have a new house and you're in debt for 30 years paying it off, or the bank will take it away from you. That's a really different relationship to your life when that starts happening. So how do you design your life? Mr. Nakamura in chapter 2, like his whole design constraint is almost using no money at all. And he was able to kind of set his mind in that way. He was a young man. He was working in a company. He got a regular salary, but he wanted to keep traveling. And he's like, well, if I keep traveling and spending a lot of money, I'll not be able to keep traveling. So he ended up living in a very small village, as I said, many days walk from a road. And he reset his mind so that and I'm not a good example of this, I should say. I'm always trying to work with this, but I'm as a reporter, he really tries to set up he lives in a very small place. He heats with firewood. He gathers the firewood himself. He, works. When he was working, I think he worked like 30, 35 days a year, right? And he saved that money and he used very, very little of it. And everybody's design constraints are different, right? We're in 2025. We're in Kerala. Everyone's got their own life conditions. But how could you redesign your life so that you had lots of time for what you loved? I have a wonderful love affair relationship with my partner, and I get so many hours a day with her. What would happen if I was like constantly trying to become the most famous writer in the world, or like, the richest writer, or million seller, right? I would lose what's really important. And it's very easy to get caught up in the trance of it. And that's what it is. It's a trance where you don't even notice it's happening to you. And you just start getting on the treadmill. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I haven't slept enough. And so to take some time to reflect, slow down, read a book, write in your journal, and find your proper relationship with money. It's not that you don't, we live in an economy that is set up that way. Not everyone can buy a piece of land that costs money, right? But each of them has a different answer. That's why there's 10 people, because they've got different approaches to it.
If you are, one of the things that you talk about, one of the two concepts that you talk about in the book, I mean, apart from the fact that these people live without money, which sort of is difficult for most people to comprehend. I mean, I don't think anybody would do it by choice, and it isn't.
They do use some money. They do use some money.
They use some money. I mean,
Yes.
that's. I mean,
Okay.
when I mean, it's minimal, right? My and we see it as subsistence. So I mean, if you look at it in terms of an Indian equivalent, when you're looking at it, you think you're looking at it and saying, but they basically taken away all the conveniences that you've ever wanted, and sort of they're living this life which is bare subsistence life, which is what one of your readers wrote to you, right? Saying that I don't know why you're glorifying this, because this is sort of bare poverty. I think she was in Indonesia, was she?
She was from the Philippines, yeah.
Yeah, she's from the Philippines. Um, but there is an aspect of joy, um, and there is an aspect of contentment, right? And pleasure. I mean, these are not words that just, they're not just words. They actually, it is about pleasure, joy, and contentment. Can you talk really about pleasure and joy in this sort of very minimalist life?
Well, just imagine your own life with you got enough sleep every single night. You ate delicious food that was natural and healthy. If you have children, you have time to be with them. This is particularly an issue for men in Japan, that they don't have any time to be with their daughters or sons. Imagine that you had plenty of time for your creativity. The earlier version, this is the second edition, the earlier version of this book was called A Different Kind of Luxury. And I think they really do live, in some sense, a very abundant life. Whereas I think many modern people, or modernized people, certainly people in the West, are living with severe time poverty. Time poverty. They don't have enough time for what actually matters. And it's a terrible suffering. So they have what they need, and they're living in the midst of the abundance of nature. So, and they're actually not deprived of the opportunity to think for themselves about how to work through some of the very difficult problems. And might I say, well, maybe I can just ask the audience, how many people think, not just think, believe that we're in a severe ecological crisis right now? Just raise your hands. And how many people think that if we just have some more electric vehicles and some solar panels and recycle more, that will more or less solve the problem? I'm sorry to be heavy with you, but like, if we cannot keep living this incredibly consumptive, rush, wasteful life and still have a place, not just for our grandchildren, but just for the animals, we really do need to make some changes. And if human beings have subsisted for not just 10,000 years, but, what are we talking about? Homo sapiens, 130,000 years. We can do it. We've lived. We can live rich lives. Not that everybody in that entire time had a wonderful life all the time, but we can't. I actually heard this quote from Gandhiji recently. This is when India had only 300 million people. He said, if 300 million Indians lived like the West, we would devour the world like locusts. Which I think we really do need to kind of think about. Can we just live with less and actually have a happier life and have more time with the people we care about? You know how it is when you're sitting in a cafe and you haven't seen your friend in 5 months or a year, and you're really glad to see her, and you're talking to her, and she's like, I have another appointment. I'm really sorry. I gotta go. And your heart is breaking. You really want some hours with that friend, but they're too rushed. It's breaking our hearts to not have that time. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I think, but you also talk about being addicted to choice, right? And can you talk a little bit about that, about the fact that, we have become sort of used to, accustomed to so many varieties and so much choice. And can maybe one of it is just sort of to simplify our lives and reduce the number of options. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Addictions are difficult, aren't they? And change is difficult. Um, I heard a story once about some change makers. They were at a change conference. Their profession was change, and it was a keynote speaker. And she was the famous change maker that all the change makers came. And she said, "Before we get started, I'd just like to ask everybody, could you just move to a different chair?" They just sat down. Everybody was like, "Oh God," thinking about, well, if changing a chair is so difficult. So I would say it's difficult to get off that treadmill. But I would say I'm pretty addicted to choice. But I think the more that I remember, reread the words of these great people, and say, maybe I said I would do something for somebody, and I don't really feel like doing it anymore. Or there's a great concert happening. Maybe I'll just not help that person. Maybe I just, and this is a big problem in California. I don't know how it is in India, but it's not so bad on the East Coast in New York. But in California, people are just so like, oh, I'm going to change. I'm going to change. This is more fun. This is more fun. And it actually leads to a great deal of dissatisfaction. We think that it's going to give us satisfaction, but sometimes being yoked, and I think that's the concept of yoga is yoke, right? Being yoked to what you've made the decision to do, being yoked to, I mean, that's what, karma yoga, um, being yoked to a particular practice, doing it on a, not just like, do I feel like it today? But you made a decision. I'm gonna stay with my practice. Maybe that would actually give you deeper satisfaction than constantly being like, well, this candy is more interesting. Well, maybe not that one. Maybe this one.
Yeah.
Maybe that one. Which one should I have? Right? You can see that that's not really a road to satisfaction. Even though I get the candy that I like the best.
Yeah. So you also relate all this, of course, about living simply, but also how, in some ways, if we want a better world, if we want to make a change, we have to give up some aspect of cushiness.
Of cushiness.
Cushiness, yeah.
Cushiness. Yes.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the readers wrote back to you and said that the people that you've profiled are the Olympic level athletes of this, right? Of sort of living simply with abundance. So what can, and maybe we all want to get there. It's a bit like Gandhi and his sustainability. You all want to get there, but it's very difficult, changes within. So can you sort of offer us three or one mantra in some ways to be able to do this for somebody who wants to change, has the desire, but can't go radical as much as sort of live off the grid?
Well, if you've been moved, you're still sitting here. If you've been moved by what I'm speaking about, maybe you want to think about what direction you want to go with the days that you have left, and think about it. I would say that would be one mantra, is to really just make some time to think about what kind of life design you want to have. That would be one. Another one is what I started out with, which is turning to the person to your left and turning to the person to your right and making some little group with them. Like, I'd like to move my life in a simpler direction. But it all presupposes having enough time to do it. And be gentle with yourself. But I'm also going to say, some of you out there in the audience, perhaps even you might, or I might, you could make a radical change and live in the mountains. Many people have written me after reading this book, like, I was sort of on the edge of doing it, but the book gave me these people gave me the fiber to just really start to disconnect from the economic system that doesn't make me happy. So it's not, as one of the people said, it's like, If you think it's too radical, if you think it's too far, then it will be. But if you think, that might be possible for me, maybe it is possible for you.
Maybe it is. I think you're right. It's a way of looking at stuff. Um, so yeah, we've run out of time, but we have time for questions. Anybody for questions?
I would really love
The-
to have some questions. So
The
a microphone
lady
back there.
right at the back.
Wait. One of this will give you the mic. Please raise your hands.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I would like it if you could speak a bit about the element of choice. Um, for example, in India, the average working man does not have much of a choice. India is a fast-moving economy, and one could argue that the modern Indian life is very intricately tied to modern capitalism. And how much of a choice does a common working man or a middle-class working man have in terms of a simpler life or moving towards a system where he has more time? um, you know, I don't know. I think even America is a highly capitalistic economy, and how much of a choice do people have to make the shift? Even though they desire to, even though their aspirations are to live in the mountains or to have more time to spend with their family.
Well, I would say if there are 1.4 billion people in India, then I would say there are probably 1.4 billion different answers to that. So I would say there are people who are absolutely in a condition of near slavery. They have no choices. Some of them are being trafficked. I don't want to say that that's not true. That is true. That's true in our world, and we have to kind of look at that. I think each of us has a responsibility for each other as much as possible. And I mean, maybe one of the questions. Okay, so I would say I don't know every working person. I know that many of the people in this book were not wealthy. They were not even middle class. They were laborers. They saved their money, and the world kind of shrinks around it. So I can't really speak for each individual person, but I know that I want to be part of a world where I'm not in an oppressive relationship with, say, if I was a landlord extracting rent from someone, or somebody who was investing in a company that was trying to suppress the rages of people. I think it's probably those of us who are at a literary festival and are free on a Friday night and have nice clothes. We might be part of that lack of choice for the person who's driving the tuk-tuk, and trying to get, the lowest price. So, but I think there's very few people, probably a good percentage, but a small percentage, who have zero choice on how to remake their lives. And there's, throughout the history of the ages, saints and ascetics who've decided that they are going to do without a lot of their comforts in order to have their freedom. But I can't figure that out for someone's life, and I wouldn't pretend, as somebody not even from this country, to say what someone's choices are or not. But I would say, from afar, we might think this person has no choice, and that's true. But I think, let's go back to what Amemia said about Gandhi. Like, why in India particularly did millions of people say, I want to follow this man's way of thinking? Somehow you have more resources than, say, someone in Illinois or someone in, maybe Germany or something like that, to pull on cultural resources and pull on community to remake life. But again, I can't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of us do have choices, and we don't. We feel that we don't we're trapped, but we may not be as trapped as as we think we are? It's a very complicated question.
Anyone else?
Yep, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was a pretty interesting session. So thank you for that. It was a pretty interesting session. Thank you for that. So my question is like, when we move towards this lower life, so you were lucky enough that you had a partner who also appreciated that. But when I first thought about moving into a slower life, I thought about my family as well. So how do you manage that? What if the people around us might not want as slower life as what we want? So how do we balance with that? Like, in, in, in the current scenario, is it possible to go ahead with a slower life alone? So when we are pulling in this, are we also not pulling all the people around us? So that is one question. Like, how do we set the surrounding or everything for a slower life?
That's a great question. And I don't know if you heard that, but what about if your family? I'm going to add something to it. My family disapproves of the way I live to some extent. I don't have a lot of extra money, right? Most of my brothers and sisters have plenty. And so I can't really, fly across the country and go to the beach with them, which is what they expect. And I'm always sort of like, I can't really go to that restaurant with them. And I'm always sort of feeling like, I'm the, and I made the choice to not, I could have potentially gotten one of those jobs and given away my freedom. I mean, I made very conscious choices. For me, it was not having children because I knew that would change the calculus quite a bit. Although many of the people in this book do have children, and many of the children complained to their parents. We don't have this, we don't have that, and the parents sort of had to take it. But that's the question: is do you do everything around you to do you make all your choices to avoid the negative, imagined negative comments of people in your family and or the people around you. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting is they're very careful not to become a burden to, say, their younger sister now, oh, bail me out or something like that. They're very ethical about, making enough so that they can take care of themselves and they take care of other people. But it's hard, when someone's, says, why aren't you, driving a car that doesn't break all the time or something like that. But I think it's an internal thing. And, I found my partner, she was on the same page with me. I suppose I'm very lucky about that, but we had that conversation early on, and we shared the same values about not really needing that much. And sometimes we really were running short. And so I was like, oh, this is difficult. And here we are fine so far now. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope so.
Yeah. So just adding on to that, so one thing I understood is that there's a lot of luck onto it also, as you said, like finding the right person or finding the right situation or the surroundings so that we can set this up. So uh, doesn't that negate the whole choosing? Whereas you see that there's a part of luck as well. Whereas like does luck does choice has to do anything with the whole luck factor as well, or what if we never find that kind of situation? So what do we do with that?
I would say have a conversation with your friend there. And I mean, I don't actually know. I don't know what your situation is, but I do know that each one of us have a lot of possibilities, and we are incredibly creative. We're incredibly flexible. Human beings live, north of the Arctic Circle. Human beings live in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Human beings live with being blind and deaf. Human beings live with chronic pain, and so we have a lot of capacity, and we have a lot of capacity in our communities. Um, and sometimes it's about traveling to a new location. Sometimes it's about learning a different skill, and sometimes we are trapped and we need to be part of a freedom struggle.
Hi. So, like in Indian context, there are philosophies like mukti, attainment of mukti or nibbana. So, like when you say abundance of life, um, like there are yogis who goes into cave and meditate for like 3 years and many years. So, like, are they experiencing abundance of life without any life? Like, uh, how is abundance of life? You know, is are these similar things? Are these philosophies similar things, like attainment of mukti and abundance of living? Like, are you completely free when you have abundance in your life?
If you're a yogi and you go off to sort of
Yes. Yeah.
go on, you're meditating, do you have an abundance?
I think you should ask them and not me, because I'm really not living that way. I I I'm going to talk just for myself, not as the people in this book, but I think this idea of like, okay, so if you're out here and you've experienced mukti or nirvana, maybe you should come up and tell me. But I think this struggle to get to this like perfect pure state, it's just not what I'm interested in. I'm rather live in the imperfection of life. To I think it's important that people are doing that. Maybe when you go visit this man or woman in their cave, they may have some wisdom for you. Maybe you'll choose that for your days. I would say they probably are making their choices, but are they living? You know, this whole thing about enlightenment. To be very honest with you, it's almost like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You keep chasing it, and are you really getting there? But I can't hear you. Sorry. And do hold it this way.
I think you are there when you are just living. Like, you are there. You don't have to go to some place and just sit alone and meditate. I don't know. I feel like there are many ways and you choose your own way.
I kind of think Mandira has an answer to this. Do you have an answer?
To different ways of thinking. So I mean, in some ways, if you ask me, what do I take away from the book? I think that I think all of us have, at some point of time, entertained the notion of sort of living simpler lives. So, sort of, I think COVID, in some ways, sort of forced us to look at an inner world where the lack of choice, many people left their jobs, many chose to reset their lives. Um, I mean, I think the one core thing of the book for me is, I so I think that the idea of self sufficiency is a different one for everybody. I mean, how do you sort of live within this small thing and sort of make your needs smaller? In some ways, you said that you asked that question as to is this abundance like but if you look at the Gita, and I'm sort of looking at it philosophically, the idea is that you don't get moved by anything else, right? You don't get moved by all this. You don't get moved by abundance. You don't get moved by um, deprivation, right? And all this, in some ways, is Maya. So we're all sort of destined to do all this unless we choose to sort of, you know, play a different part, right? The question is then, I mean, and then of course there's a diversion as to what part we have to play. You know, the Mahabharata in its own way is an interesting way of looking at that. But the idea is actually wanting less, living with less. The idea of consumerism, I think, is possibly one of the most dangerous. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I will, I want my Americano from a particular brand, and I will not have Nescafe. So I'm not trying to say that I am sort of in that space where I can give up. But what I'm trying to say is that if we pare down our needs, and it's a very it's like hate, right? Hate is seductive, as is the idea to consume much more. So could you in and in some ways, if you look at my own listening, if you have children, and that's the question you're asking in some ways, what do you do? What do you do if you have a partner? What do you have to do when you have children? Do you sort of, I'm going on and on, but essentially, what do you do? Can you make the choices for them? And I think, if you ask me, I don't think you'd have to make the choices for them, but could you sort of get them to be happy with less? Where the value of looking outside the window and talking about birds, barn owls. We have hornbill, which my kids save every year. But my point is, can you sort of look at different aspects? Can you sort of want less? Can you say 1 year I will not buy anything? I made that resolution. I'm still trying to keep to it. But I think it's that. I think it's how do you live with less? How, at some point of time, this is crass consumerism, and do you really want the next white shirt? And every time Nicobar goes on sale, do you really have to buy something? I think it boils down to that. In terms of India, we sort of are living with less. We recycle incredibly. So there is that. So I don't know. I mean, that's what, if you ask me, that's what it is. Is that what you wanted me to answer?
Oh, that was great. I'd just like to say, if you're a publisher or a translator, we are looking to translate this book into
Malayalam
and Gujarati.
And Gujarati. Oh,
Yeah, in Bengali.
And Bengali.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just contact me and I'll put you in. There's a Vietnamese version and a Turkish version. And I've gotten emails from people in Turkey who are living this way. I've gotten emails from people in Vietnam who are living this way. I did a lecture tour in China. All over the world, people are making these choices. And it's very possible. And so, I want to thank you all for your attention. I hope you had have some time tonight to write in your journal and to kind of reflect on the things that you heard today, not just here, but all day, and to taste your life twice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you very much.